let me show you how this works. So we've got 3 freeze dryers. All 3 of the batches are done. They were actually done last night, but I've been running them all day so I could do this video. So again, each one of these, if you saw my little sneak peek video, you saw that I've got little power sense relays plugged into each freeze dryer in place of where the pump normally connects. So this relay power sense box connects to one that's over there, and then it connects to one that's over here, connected to this freeze dryer, and then they're all connecting over to this power switching box that we talked about in another video, in the sneak peek video, I think. Anyway, that is in place of that expensive one that I've been using for a couple of years. So I just wanted to show you, yes indeed, this small relay box can actually run this massive pump. And that pump is a Leybold, and it draws about 9 amps, so that little relay box can handle 12. Okay? So I also want to show you what's going on with all of these valves. Okay? There's a valve for each one of the freeze dryers, and the reason for that is under normal circumstances you're going to have one freeze dryer finish before the other ones. And so we're going to go ahead and show you right now. This one I'm going to force to be done by changing the dry time, and it'll say that it's done. Okay? Now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to shut this valve. A little hard to do one-handed. And you see this freeze dryer is measuring 136 millitorrs. This one is measuring 158, and that's because I've done some calibrating between these two machines. Now the readings are more accurate at 500 millitorrs, which is where all the important stuff happens, but anyway, they're pretty close at those low pressures also. So I'm going to go ahead and open this. I'm going to turn off power, and I'm going to open the drain valve on this unit. And since I've got that valve closed, the other freeze dryers are not going to see the fact that this one's been taken offline. And so I'm going to go ahead and take this tomato sauce out and go ahead and package it while these continue running. And right now this one's reading 134 millitorr, and this one is reading 158. So with those valves, you're able to isolate one of these if you have to do something like unload it to pack it or check to see if it's done. But anyway, that works great. And I also wanted to show you, since this is off now, okay, there is no power on this power sense relay, okay? And these are wired in parallel, so it's a wire or function. It means any of them can turn on this pump, but they all have to want the pump off to be able to turn it off. Okay, so we'll go into that more when we look at the other 2 freeze dryers once I deal with this one. Alright, that machine's all done, so let's say this one is the next one that we want to empty. So I'm going to go ahead and say end, and I'm going to say no defrost. Okay, you'll notice it's turned off that light. So this one doesn't want the pump on anymore. And so we're going to go ahead and close this valve, like yay. We're going to open this one and let that vent. And you see this one still sees 157 millitorrs. So this one is still running the pump. And you see that light is on. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and unload this. That one's all packed up. So now we're going to go ahead and finish this one. and you notice that the pump went off, and that's because the freeze dryer wants it off. So you see that light's off, and let me just fake it out and tell it I want more dry time, and it'll say close the drain valve, and then it's going to say, okay, there you go, the pump's on, and you see the light is on. My point here is that with this setup, either freeze dryer, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3, each one has to have one of those power sense relays. They have to be hooked in parallel, and then they go to this little power switcher, and it means that any of the freeze dryers can turn on the pump, but they all have to want the pump off to be able to turn it off. Now we're going to talk about what's involved in the way of electronics to be able to run this pump. Okay, and we're going to be running it with 3 freeze dryers. So let me first say, in my little demo here, each one of these little white boxes have a power switch on them. Okay, these are going to represent the freeze dryers trying to turn on the pump. We're going to go over here to what's called a truth table. Okay, and let me put up a color version of this. What you're going to see is on the left there are inputs from 3 freeze dryers, freeze dryer 1, 2, and 3, and we have 1 output, and that is how we want to control the pump. Okay, now I have marked the pump off as being red, and that's 0, and the pump being on as green, and that's a 1. So each freeze dryer can try to turn the pump on or off, and there are 3 freeze dryers. So there are a total of 2 to the 3rd power possible combinations. So 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. And you'll see 8 horizontal rows here that have all of the different possibilities that the freeze dryers can be doing and how we want the pump to react. Now I look at this and I can instantly tell that that is an OR function, but you could do the Boolean math and reduce the terms and all that kind of stuff. Basically it's a three input OR function. So a couple of ways you can do that. The way I've decided to do it is with relay logic. So we've got these little power sense relay boxes here. Let me explain that in a minute. But the way that these contacts are wired, these are wired in parallel, okay, which creates an OR function. They call it a wire OR because it's being done with relay logic and wire. Okay, so let's talk about how this is all wired up, and we're going to come back to this truth table here in just a minute. Okay, this is how it's wired up. I'm going to go ahead and put this up on the screen. You can pause it and print it out if you want. Over here on the right, there is something that's marked power switcher. Okay, that's this box over here. And down at the bottom, you can see there's an AC input, and that connects to household power. You'll see there's a pump connected to an outlet that is marked normally off. Okay, so here is our power input cord. Here is our pump connected to an outlet that is marked normally off. Okay, now to turn this outlet on, we present DC voltage to this connector here, and this is called the trigger input. So we need 12 volts power. That's at least what I'm using, and so I've got a 12 volt power supply hooked up, and that is here on the diagram, and it's plugged into an outlet that says always on, and there you go, this says always on right here. Okay, now if you look, the positive terminal on the power supply is routed directly into the trigger input positive, and that is this yellow wire here. It's going from positive on this connector to positive on the trigger. Okay, now the negative terminal is going over to the relays. So it's going over to the common on this first relay. It's also going down here to the second relay and the third relay. That is this black wire that's going from here over to the common, over to the common, and over to the other common. Now the The other side of the relay, we're using the normally open contacts. Those are also connected together here, and they route back to the negative input on the trigger. So you'll see the normally open contact in parallel, and that runs up here to the minus terminal on the trigger input. I'm going to get set up for a quick little demo. First off, let me just show you. So when I turn on Harvest Right freeze dryer number 1, this is the freeze dryer trying to turn on the pump, and this is the outlet from the pump going to this relay sense box. Okay, and now this sees 120 volts, and you can see that that power indicator is on. Okay, and I can turn it off here. Now freeze dryer number 2, freeze dryer number 3, and off. So let's go through the truth table. Keep an eye on these power lights here, and if that's on, okay, that's a 1, and you're going to see green corresponding on the chart. So the first row is with all freeze dryers off. Okay, this is the second row, and that's freeze dryer number 1 only. Okay, then 2 only, then number 1 and 2. Now we're going to do 3 only, and 3 and 1, 3 and 2, and now all 3. And you can see that the pump is on for all of those conditions except when all 3 want the pump off. So there have been some developments over the last couple of months, and I want to talk about them really quickly. So Patrick over at frozenright.com is making a box he calls a cable cooler. Okay, and this is really, functionally it does cool the cables, but it's really a pump relay controller. Okay, so the idea really came from a video that I did showing damage to wiring on a Harvest Right because the pump messed up and it was drawing way too much power. Well, that pump was drawing about 7 amps. This particular pump over here, this industrial Leybold, this draws 9 amps. And you cannot hook this up directly to a Harvest Right. You have to have some kind of a pump relay controller like this. Okay, so the way this works is it's got an outlet for a pump, it's got an inlet for power, and then on the back it has one of those standard connectors to connect to a freeze dryer pump port. Okay, and that's a single channel. So when I looked at this box, I looked inside and I said, I called Patrick and said, you've got enough room to make this into a 2-channel version. And about 2 months later, voila, here it is, cable cooler, 2-channel. Now this has an input A and B for the freeze dryer pump ports. It comes with these cables that hook into the freeze dryer outlets that are intended to run the pump. So again, these represent the freeze dryers and represent the freeze dryers trying to turn power on and off. So I'm going to give you a really quick little demonstration here. So his little box has a light that goes on when there's power coming in, and so here's freeze dryer number 1 turning on the pump. Okay, here's freeze dryer number 2 turning on the pump, and here's both freeze dryers wanting the pump on, and here's both freeze dryers wanting the pump off. Okay, so the other thing about this is it's available right now. This one's available right now. There's no wiring involved that you have to do, like hooking up all those relays and the power supply and all that. It does not come with an input power cord. This is basically, just an extension cord, good quality one. So you can get one like this. This is a standard 10-foot 14 gauge. It's got the right pin out to plug right in. Okay, I personally, anything longer than 10 foot, I would recommend that you go with a 12 gauge, and that's what this one is. This extension cord is a 25 foot, kind of expensive. This is almost $70 for this particular power cord. And this is how he has things hooked up. So the first freeze dryer he has going to a wall outlet he calls number 1. The second freeze dryer goes to one that's called wall circuit 3. And the pump controller goes to one that's called wall circuit number 2. And then there is the Leybold pump right there. All right, well, if you're interested in one of those, you can get one directly from frozenright.com. Get a hold of Patrick. Let him know that Epicenter Brian sent you. And you can get a hold of Patrick at that email. And there is going to be a separate video on the cable cooler at some point, so keep an eye on our YouTube channel. Now we're going to talk about the plumbing that's involved to be able to run multiple freeze dryers. So I'm going to disassemble this. This is what I use, and then we'll talk about each part. That's the first part that's needed to hook up to this Leybold pump. And the reason is the inlet is KF25. So the way this works is with the KF25 there's a localizing, centralizing ring that's got a gasket on it. Okay, and then the mating part fits with that, and then a clamp goes around it, and that forces those two together. So the reason I'm doing this is it's a lot less expensive to pipe stuff up with 3/4 inch JIC, or even with 3/4 inch national pipe, than it is to use KF25. An example, this is a KF25T that's machined that would do some of this task, but the problem is, you know, this is $108 for this one piece, and then you still have to connect up more KF25 things to this pipe, and you need more of these rings, you need more of these clamps. So let me show you how I did this. This is 2 pieces. One is KF25 to 3/4 inch national pipe, and then there's a second part that's national pipe female that goes to JIC 3/4 inch. And right there where the threads match, you want to use a thread locker and follow the instructions on their website. This takes 24 hours for that to set up, but that works really well in making sure this is leak free. Alright, let's start assembling stuff. So first off, that's the part that goes from KF25 to JIC. This next part is called a swivel T, JIC 3/4 inch. So you have 2 males and a female. We don't sell any of these parts, so search online. If anybody carries this part, they're going to have all the rest of the parts. Okay, so there's one other thing involved. Now, anytime you have a connection between JIC and JIC, you know, these machine surfaces are not necessarily perfect. So you want to put one of these copper cones in between there. And there are 2 kinds. This is the most common. There's one issue with that though. Okay, as long as you can assemble everything like this, you're fine. You can get that centralized and then put your next part on. But if you have to do this at an angle, okay. So there's another one that has a little lip on it. Okay, these are harder to find, but once you put that on, it stays in place. So that's a pretty cool part. And there is the part number that you want to search for. These are about $3 a piece. The other part's probably $1 a piece. Okay, now, once you get this assembled, and I'll do that, we'll look at the next part. Now, if you were running 2 freeze dryers and you didn't want the valves, this is where you could stop. And you don't put the copper here or here because the hoses have an O-ring seal. Okay? Now, for 3 freeze dryers, you would add another part, and this one is called a swivel branch T. So that's a swivel T and that's a swivel branch T. And then again, in between those parts, you would put one of those copper gaskets. Now you can see that there are 3 places to connect freeze dryer hoses. Now if you want to hook up the valves, we're just going to look at one of them because they're all identical. So there is the information on the valve I'm using. And this is 3/4 inch national pipe on each end, female. And so I've got a JIC to 3/4 inch female here, and then I've got a male JIC 3/4 inch to 3/4 inch national pipe on this end. Again, using that leak lock compound right here in the threads on both of these. So this entire assembly just gets duplicated, or you make 3 of them. And again, remember, you have to use one of these copper washers here at each one of these connection points. Okay, whether you're using 2 or 3 or just 1, if you just want to use one of these, you know, you're still going to want to use one of these copper cones. There's one other little trick. Since all the hoses come out on the same side, and I wanted this freeze dryer to point in the front like this other one, I went ahead and put together another set of fittings back here to just go around the corner so that I had a place for that hose to hook up without having to extend the hose. Okay, and here what I did was I did a right angle female to male JIC, a JIC male to male, and then in between those is a JIC female to female. And again, at this point, and this point are those copper cones. Okay, and I leave this attached all the time now. Anytime I have to move this around, I just leave the hose connected and roll it around. There's one other trick. If you didn't want to add those extra JIC connectors, you could take 2 Harvest Right hoses like this, and you could put one of those JIC to JIC connectors in here, male to male. Okay, now over here, you see everything is reinstalled, and this will give you a little better perspective of what this all, how this all connects up. But that way, the right freeze dryer, the left freeze dryer, and the one that I roll up in the front. And of course, you can configure that any way you want, but that works for me. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that video. For the Epicenter.com, Epicenter Brian here, signing out.